Hey, good morning. If we've never met, my name is Powell. I'm one of the pastors here, and I'm going to start us off by putting a few words on the screen, and I want to see how many of you know what these words mean. Right? If someone said you're bussin', you're gas, you're Gucci, you're fire, like, is that a good thing? Or is that a not so good thing? My Gen Zers, where are you? You know. These are Gen Z slang terms. Those of you who aren't Gen Z, or for those who are going, what's Gen Z? Right, that's that crew that's coming up behind us. They're age 12 to 27. We snagged these out of their slang list. So if as this crew, this generation is engaging in the world that we live in, we kind of need to know how to interact with them. And if they said to you, if you went to lunch today and someone said, hey, those shoes are bussin', what you need to know is you have, in your terms, you would be like, you might have said, hey, those are cool. Those are awesome. Bussin', gas, Gucci, and fire, those are good things. All right. When you hear someone say that to you, you can kind of maybe throw your shoulders back, especially if you're not age 12 to 27. If you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s, you're like, I didn't know I owned anything that was Gucci. Right? But it gives you reason to kind of throw those shoulders back, get your elbows back, your chin a little higher. You get a little bigger walk, right? You fill up more physical space when you know that you are bussin', you are gas, and you are Gucci. Right? How about that? So in my life, I've had many moments where I've felt like this. But particularly when I was 18 years old, I felt like I was all those combined and a whole lot more. Any of you at age 18, the frontal lobe wasn't all the way kicked in yet, especially the guys? Yeah. For me, I just got accepted to college. I received a running scholarship, exceeded my expectations. I came from this little bitty town where I just looked like this weird skinny guy with tights on running around town. That's who I was. But when I got to college, all of a sudden, I had more success. I look back on it. I'm still like, I wish I could run that fast again. But the people around me, what they started telling me was, they're like, oh, you are the bomb. You heard the phrase, I believed my own press. What they were telling me and the accolades, everything that went with it, it gave me a lot of reasons to bring my shoulders back and get my head held high. And I walked around like I was the bomb. I mean, I craved the attention. I loved it. And given about that much chance, I would tell you how good I was. No doubt. I'm sure none of you have ever been there in your whole life, right? You wonder, well, how bad could it actually have gotten? Truth is, I had one of my teammates in front of our whole team. I don't know, 30, 40. I have no idea how many were there. She came up in front of me. She had a magazine. She shoved this magazine in my face. The magazine was Self Magazine. She said, you are the most self-centered person I've ever been around. And as if that wasn't enough, she then pulls out a vanity mirror. You know, the one in the bathroom. I didn't know what it was called. I had to ask. Shoved it in my face and said, the only person you think about is the person you see in that mirror. I think if we're all honest with ourselves, we've had those moments where we want to pull our shoulders back, right? I don't know what that looks like in your life. Maybe it was when you were in high school or college. Maybe it was that you were that athlete and you were that good. Or maybe you were the one like Susan Lyons in my high school. Susan Lyons made 100 on everything and you were never going to get a grade higher than her. She maxed out the ACT and the SAT. If you're watching Susan Lyons, you're the bomb. Could have been in the workplace, or if you're in the military, right? I mean, you know who you are when you're that rising star. When you always figure out the problems, you always figure out the solution, the process quicker than everybody else. You're selling more than everybody else. And you're looking around and you're getting promoted. 2 or 3 came in together, but you're the one promoted quicker and faster than everybody else. And you have reason to pull those shoulders back. And you're saying, hey, I am the bomb. I think it can also happen in parenting. When you've got little ones, and Amy and I, we have 2 boys now. They're not little anymore. We're actually just got news that we're going to be grandparents. Like, that wasn't part of my message, but I kind of feel like I'm the bomb in that moment right there. Yeah. It just became official. Like, I didn't even plan on saying that, but hey, welcome to my world. Right. So where was I? Yeah. With kids, what you can find is that there are times that you look at your kids and you got all your ducks in a row. You're like, I got this one, that one. They're dressed nice. They're dressed the same. They got the, whatever that frocky stuff is called that they wear. I don't even know. I told Amy, our kids can't wear that. You look around, but you look at the other kids and the other parents don't even know where their ducks are. And you're going, that's so sad. But for all of us, there are times when something can grow inside of us that makes us so self-centered. It can take root in us that it begins to change how we live, how we see ourselves, and actually how we go through life. That's what we're talking about in our current series called Kudzu. What we've learned about Kudzu is actually the roots can grow up to 12 feet deep. And when something grows that deep into the earth, or something grows that deep within inside us, it is hard for us to eradicate it. So what we're saying is, what takes root takes over. What takes root in us, that wanting to be selfish, can take over in our lives. And if you missed last week, what we did is we looked at the emotion of bitterness. We looked at bitterness and we said, okay, if you're bitter, it impacts your life. And we said the definition of bitterness was this, is that it's a complex, multi-layered emotion. And there were 3 emotions that we tied to it. Who remembers what those emotions were? Disappointment, disgust, and anger. And they can take root. But we said there is a way out, and that way out is through the only thing that can uproot bitterness is forgiveness. If you missed last week, I hope you'll go back and you'll watch that message and message 1. If you missed either of those 2 messages. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at a behavioral characteristic. We've already started thinking about it. A behavioral characteristic that's in each and every one of us. And no matter what we do, no matter what you believe about Jesus, where you would say you are on a continuum of, I've not put my faith in Jesus yet, or you're trying to figure out, how do I continue to grow my faith after decades? This behavioral characteristic impacts each and every one of us, and we can't get away from it. But the good thing about today is we're going to talk about how do we resolve it. We're going to look at what can we learn through the life of Jesus, and how can we apply this in our life in a way that can help us uproot the behavioral characteristic of self-centeredness. Self-centeredness is in all of us. And if you don't think it is, go over to our 2-year-old room in Waumba Land, our preschool environment, and you will see a bunch of self-centered wee ones in there who is all about them. Right? The definition we're going to use, our working definition for self-centeredness, is this. It's believing everything is about ourselves with little regard for others. Kind of sounds like a 2-year-old, doesn't it? Kind of sounds like us, doesn't it? But I think let's dig it in one layer deeper. And I would really like to look at this definition. And when you read this, I want you to focus on that word right there, because it really is about me. And today, I don't want you to think about the other people who are self-centered. I want you to think about yourself. And as we work through this definition, it's self-centeredness is believing everything is about me with little regard for others. And not me. You're reading that as you. That me is you, right? Because when we perceive that we are self-centered, when we are in this moment of like, I am self-centered, when it is fully rooted and it's fully growing, whether we recognize it or not, we perceive that we're the center of the universe, our universe, my universe. We perceive that time started when we were born. And the only lens is my lens. My viewpoint is the viewpoint. The thing with these, and the truth behind these is that I identify with those at times. And you know what? It's kind of easy. And just to be fully transparent, sometimes it feels good to be self-centered. To just think about me, to worry about me, to process me. Like, can you be honest enough to say, hey, that it does kind of feel good? And for me, what I find is that when I'm high stress, my self-centeredness follows my stress. Anybody know somebody like that? Don't elbow anybody because it could make for a bad Father's Day. But I think that's how we track. The more stressed I get, the more self-centered I become. Psychology teaches us that when we are fully self-centered, when we are so self-centered, it's so deep-rooted in us that we do not worry about the feelings. We do not worry about the emotions, the needs, the perspectives, or the actions of others. Because it's all about me. And when we go so far, when we begin to take no regard or disregard feelings, emotions, need, perspectives, and actions of those around us, what psychology also teaches us is that we begin to live in a world of isolation. We push everybody out. Think about it. When you are the center of the universe, when you believe that your viewpoint is the only viewpoint, when you do not really tend to care that much about feelings, emotions, needs, perspective, and actions of others, then all we have left to do is just to become this little myopic view of life. And we begin to live very isolated. When we think we're just controlling our symptom, we're controlling our life, we're really removing everybody else around us. And the truth is, none of us want to live that way. You don't want your neighbor to be like that. You don't want your boss to be like that. You don't want your coworker to be like that. You don't want your kids to marry someone like that. And honestly, you don't want to be friends with anybody that thinks they are that center. When we think about self-centeredness, as I said, it's not new. It's not something that we just created. It's not something that was in the Gen Z slang term book that, oh, now we're going to have this self-centered, this thing called self-centeredness. No, it's been here forever and ever, and it's been a problem. It really is a sin problem that's been in the world since we've been in the world, and way before us have been in the world. And what we're going to look at today is a group of people who we would have thought, and I thought when we dug in, there's no way that these guys are going to be self-centered, because we're going to talk about the 12 disciples, Jesus handpicked disciples who he chose to follow him around for 3 years. And you would think they would get it, but they didn't get it. And I don't know what you think about when you think about the disciples. You think about those 12. Maybe you think of these stately men, very academic. Maybe they walked around in a smoking jacket with a pipe, just spewing wisdom. And people came to them for like, oh, disciples, please tell us what we should do. It's just the opposite. Jesus' handpicked disciples were really misfits. They were guys that were about the same age as I was when I was a freshman in college, with that frontal lobe not fully developed. There was one that was older, but the others all fell into this category. And typically in this time, they had already been selected by a rabbi, someone to follow that would teach them, but for whatever reason, they weren't. And Jesus went around and said, okay, I'll take that one, I'll take that one, I'll take you, I'll take you, I'll take you. The next misfit, you come with me and come follow me. To me, there's a great underlying story in that when Jesus chose, just as he's chosen us, he said, hey, I'll take all of them, the misfits or not. But as they began walking with Jesus, they didn't have the benefit we had. They couldn't read the Bible, hear a story. They were figuring out as they went along. So we're going to look at what a response they had in the book of Luke chapter 22. If you want to look it up, we're going to put it on the screen as well. But we're going to look at how the disciples responded in a situation. Let me give you a quick backstory. Jesus had just called them together for the Last Supper, a very intimate, sincere moment. He's told them that he's going to die. He's told them that one of them is going to betray him. He launched and introduced the Lord's Supper or communion. This was a very somber and serious moment in the life of the disciples and in their life with Jesus. And what we read next, the very first words, lets you go, oh yeah, but they were 18, no frontal lobe, or well, not developed frontal lobe, and clueless. So here we go. We're going to jump in. Luke chapter 22. It says, within minutes. So all that seriousness, all that like, this is where the world is going. And by the way, I'm choosing you 12 to spread it. And they're going to be talking about it one day at Wiregrass Church. Like that crew. But within minutes, he said they were bickering over who would end up the greatest. What? But see, like I said, the disciples, they didn't understand it. They didn't get it. They were thinking there was going to be this earthly kingdom. And Jesus intervenes. I like that it says he intervened. And he begins to tell them, hey, let me see if I can explain this in a way that you will understand. And he spoke to them directly on their level. He says, Jesus intervened. Kings like to throw their weight around, and people in authority like to give themselves fancy titles. We all tracking with that? That's still current in today's world, right? They were like, okay, I understand that, Jesus, thank you. Then he tells them, it's not going to be that way with you. He's like, no, we're not doing it that way. But then he continues on. He's like, I don't think you got it yet. He says, let the senior among you become the junior, and let the leader act the part of the servant. And they're thinking, wait, that's upside down. You're going to be king on earth. We want to sit beside you. But you're telling us we've got to be the junior and we've got to be the servant? But he doesn't finish there. He continues on. He says, who would you rather be? Again, speaks to them on a level they can understand. The one who eats the dinner or the one who serves the dinner? Who serves the dinner? Rhetorical question, because he says you would rather eat and be served, right? And they're all going, yes. They're thinking earthly kingdom. They're still tracking, but they don't fully get it. But then Jesus ends it up by saying, but I've taken my place among you as the one who serves. Jesus had every moment to have every reason to bring his shoulders back, throw his elbows back, put his chin in the air, and say that I am the one. This is all about me. But even in that moment, the disciples didn't fully understand. But along the way, as you read more, Matthew did get it. The others did get it, because we get to read what Matthew said in Matthew chapter 20, verse 28, as he was describing Jesus in his gospel. He says, the Son of Man, Jesus, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus, who is the center of the universe, right? He said, but I'm not going to live that way. The senior is going to be the junior. The leader is going to be the servant. He says, I came to serve, even to the point to give his life for everyone. I love what the book of Colossians, this is written by a guy named Paul, one of Jesus' followers. He started churches and then wrote letters to them to help them understand, just like us, what does it mean to follow Jesus? And in this instance, he was describing to them who Jesus is. And it's a great way for us to see and really see what Scripture says to help us solidify that Jesus is the center of the universe. Here's what it says. It says, for by him, Jesus, all things were created. Who created them all? Jesus did. Things in heaven and on earth. That's everything. Visible and invisible. You mean he created invisible things? I mean, that's what it says. Whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. Jesus is the center of the universe. He created it all. It's all for him. He had every reason to walk with his head held high. During his time on earth, he had every reason to be self-centered. But the thing that we continue to learn about Jesus, what I love about the way Jesus lived, is that he modeled what it looks like for us. Jesus, if he was an earthly king, would probably just told us what to do. But as our heavenly Father, Jesus said, no, there's more to this, and I want to model it for you. And what I love that Jesus modeled in his life, that you and I have an opportunity, a choice to follow, is that he said, I'm not going to live this self-centered life. He said, I'm going to choose to live an others-centered life. Jesus said it could be all about me. But he said, no, I'm going to choose to live a different way. I'm going to live an others-centered life. Imagine what that would be like if you had all the power. You were in the room and you knew you were the head knocker. You knew you were bussing and nobody could do anything about it. And you could call the shots. That's what Jesus knew. He knew the future. He knew their thoughts. But instead, he said, I'm not going to live there. I'm not going to take advantage of that. He said, I'm going to choose to put others first and live an others-centered life. The reality for me and you, for all of us, is that we have times in our life where we are the authority. We have times that every one of us have times in our life where we either have the positional authority, we have the relational authority, and we can call the shot. And we know that what we say is what's going to happen. And we can choose to be self-centered. I mean, think about it. It could be as simple as, where do you want to go to dinner? And you know that whatever you say goes. And you know that you can pick something that your kids absolutely hate, but you absolutely love it. And you have a choice. We have a choice to go, do I think about their feelings, emotions, actions, perceptions? Or do I just choose to be self-centered and pick what I want because I'm in control? It happens in our families. It happens in our marriages. It happens with our kids. We have so many opportunities every day to be self-centered. And if you are in a place of work where you're in authority, typically everybody's over somebody, we have the chance to be self-centered. And we don't even see it. But Jesus said, I'm not going to live here. He said, I'm going to choose to be others-centered. And so the question that I want us to unpack, I want to unpack with you is, okay, what is it that gets us from here, self-centered nature, it's how we're wired, to an other-centered life? What is the superpower? What is the thing that helps us get from what we naturally want to do to be able to live and model what Jesus modeled for us? The beauty of that is we can look and see what Jesus did. Again, one of the reasons so many of us follow Jesus is because he says what he's going to do. He models it for us, and then we get to see it, and we can choose if we're going to follow it or not. We're going to look at what Jesus did in Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2 shows us who Jesus is and what this superpower is that we have a chance to be a part of. It says, who Jesus, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. He said, I'm not going to choose to live this self-centered life. It goes on and he says, rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, but being made in human likeness. He said, I'm giving all that away. He says, yes, I was in heaven, but I'm going to choose to leave the perfectness of heaven, and I'm going to come down to earth. I'm going to live here on earth with people who are going to deny me, people who are going to hate me, people who are not going to believe what I say, and people ultimately who are going to put me to death. Jesus says, that's what I'm going to choose to do. And the last verse, we're going to look at verse 8, says, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. What's the secret sauce? What's the superpower? What is it that Jesus modeled for each and every one of us? It was humility. He said, I'm going to humble myself. See, humility is the very thing that uproots self-centeredness. There's only one thing, because when self-centeredness grows deep, remember, it takes us all the way to isolation. Now, when we talk about humility, the definition that we're going to use is this. We're going to say humility is choosing to treat others as if they are more important than yourself. This is a biblical definition. We chose to use this definition because the world's definition of humility is tough to follow. It's basically to just lower yourself. Doesn't sound like something I want to do. But what I love about what Jesus modeled for us, he showed us that we have a choice. And when we look at humility, we have a choice. We can make a cognitive decision to treat others as if, right? Not like they are. But in order to humble ourselves, we can choose to treat others as if they are more important than we are. That's tough. As Amy and I were talking through, and I talk to a lot of people before I stand up here in front of you to make sure all this stuff makes sense and kind of goes together. And I was sharing this idea of humility with Amy. The thing Amy said to me, we both kind of said together, we said, it sounds simple, but it feels impossible. Right? To humble ourselves like that sounds simple, but it feels impossible at times. So we want to look at, as we wrap up our time together, I want to look at this idea of humility. And what does it look like to humble ourselves? How do we do what Jesus did? Because he's Jesus, right? And you can go, well, it's easier for him. And yeah, he is Jesus, but he still chose. And we have the same choice. So as we look at humbling ourselves and following Jesus' model, I want to share 4 things that I believe that when we take these steps, it won't make us be humble because it's difficult, but it will help us live a more humble life. The first one is this. We have to acknowledge our sinful nature drives us toward self-centeredness. We all live in a fallen and broken world full of sin. Remember, the 2-year-old, nobody has to teach a 2-year-old to be self-centered. Nobody had to teach us to be self-centered. Some of us still have a lot to learn when it comes to being self-centered. So what I believe the first thing we need to do is just acknowledge that we are all self-centered. It's part of the world we live in, and we're not going to get away from it. And acknowledge that it is part of our sin nature. The second, because it is part of our sin nature, we can't resolve it. We can't fix it on our own. To lean forward and try harder to be like, I'm going to be humble today, hon. Good luck being humble. Yeah, good luck being humble. It's a part of our sin nature, and it's so easy to do because it feels so good at sometimes. So because of that, step 2 is to ask God to help. You've got to invite God into the process because the opportunities to be self-centered are so numerous. So acknowledge that it's a sin nature. The second is ask God to help you. The third is to take responsibility of your current and past actions. If we don't own our actions, if we don't own the hurt, and maybe today as you sit here, you're thinking, wow, I do have some areas in my life where I am self-centered. And I'll tell you, as I've been processing this message for however long it's been, probably a month now, last week, I had to deal with my own bitterness for several weeks. Then I get the joy of dealing with my own self-centeredness. To have to own my own actions, deal, where am I self-centered? And one thing I hope you'll do is throughout this week is you'll begin to acknowledge that, oh my goodness, right there, I'm self-centered. And take responsibility for your actions. Sometimes that might mean you're going to have to go back and apologize to somebody. Because you may look up and you realize it's been the you story. It's been the you show. It's been all about your hopes and dreams because your tendency has been to make it all about you. So acknowledge that it's a sin nature, that we are forgiven for it. Invite God into the process. And then take responsibility for your actions. And then the fourth is this. Decide to shift your focus. Shift your focus. You say, hey, it's so easy to live a self-centered life. I'm going to take a step and I'm going to begin to shift my focus off of me, the thing that feels good, and I'm going to move over here and I'm going to become others-centered. I'm going to shift so that I can live an others-centered life. It's a step. All we're asking is let's take a step together. Much like bitterness, and as we talked about bitterness and forgiveness being the thing that uproots bitterness, it's not hey, I'm going to turn the light switch on, turn the light switch off. It's a process. When it comes to our self-centeredness, it didn't just start overnight. It started at birth, and it's going to take a long time for us to move away from it because it is our sin nature, and it's not a turn the light switch on, turn the light switch off, and it's over. But we have to work every single day to put others first. And to choose to treat others as if they are more important than us. When we take those steps, it does help us to move in a more Christ-like direction. Imagine if everybody we lived around was willing to do that. Wouldn't it be a much better place to live? What if as a church, and when I say church, I don't mean the building, I mean us, right? We are the church. We, the people, make up this church. But what if when people heard and someone said, hey, you go to Wiregrass Church, they begin to think, man, they so care for other people at that church. As you engage with four and you continue to breathe things back, we continue to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Our community does know us that way. And we have opportunities to show that, to put others first. And thank you for the step that many of you have taken to do that over and over. But imagine in your workplace, if you, the boss, could begin to put others first, what a difference it would make. Because at that point, what we're able to do is we're saying we're prioritizing the people that God brings across our path, the people that God brings into our life. We are seeing them not as a nuisance, not as somebody just to get something done, not as just somebody that's an inconvenience. We're beginning to look at them and say, what are their feelings, their actions, their perceptions, and their needs? And how can we engage with them? I'll close with this. Whatever your closest relationship is, if it's a friendship, if it's a marriage, if it's within your family, if you feel that there's a tear there, there's a divide, imagine if we could all begin to live an other-centered life. If we could begin to put their needs ahead of our needs. Imagine the difference that it can make in your home, in your friendships, and everybody around you. The beautiful thing is that God has a plan for all of us. He loves us so much. He knows we have a sin nature, but he will pull in right beside each of us and walk with us when we invite him into the process. This morning, my prayer is that you invite God in to walk with you as you deal with the sin nature of self-centeredness. Let me pray for us. God, this morning, thank you for helping us see really in many ways who we are and how we live. God, thank you that you didn't abandon us. God, thank you that you sent your son Jesus and he modeled for us, not just told us what to do, but modeled what it looked like when he had every right to be a self-centered leader, but he chose to put others first. God, help us to take a step today and move towards someone in our life and show just a little bit more humility than we might have been able to yesterday. And we pray these things in your son's name. Amen.